one of the things I wanted to talk about in this video is the need for America and Israel to end their current war against Iran. This war serves no one, and the argument that I'm going to present is grounded in the thought of Matua Toyohiko Kagawa, the great Christian pacifist of the 20th century, a man that I've long admired and draw upon daily, even in terms of inspiration and intellectual reflection. So let us get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of this Matua Kagawa-esque argument. So, number one, Matua Kagawa's core premise is that violence is socially self-destructive. So, Matua Toyohiko Kagawa argued that violence is not just morally wrong, but structurally corrosive to society itself. Now, for those of you that think that this might be some sort of naive, hippie type perspective, no. Kagawa had read the great philosophers, one of them being Hegel, in order to understand the nature of the state. And one of the things that he picked up from reading Matua Hegel was the notion of contradiction. Basically, contradictions within a society, it's like a tension, a sort of a source of conflict, and that these are inherently destabilizing for any state. And so when Matua Kagawa talks about violence being structurally corrosive to a society itself, he's not meaning in a sort of naive, sort of spiritual sort of way, but rather what he's offering is a materially grounded argument that essentially we can only play this game for so long. That is what Matua Kagawa argues. And so violence, in Matua Kagawa's view, is like poison circulating through a body's veins. It does not stay contained. It seeps, thickens, clots. What begins as a strike outward returns inward, infecting the organs that depend on clean flow. If violence carries its own decay in its bloodstream, then a prolonged war, even if framed as defensive, is like a body chewing its own tongue. It cannot heal while it continues the bite. So, from a Matua Kagawa perspective, continued escalation between the US, Israel, and Iran would not strengthen the skeleton of peace. It would fracture the bones that hold the future upright. And here's an example for those of you that think that maybe this sounds a bit too theoretical. Here's an example. Skyrocketing fuel prices. That's a material grounded example of the kind of corrosive effect violence has on everyone, including those waging the war. Prices for everyone at the supermarket literally go up. And so it is not just the party being attacked that suffers as a result of this line of action. So, number two, peace requires moral action, not just ideals. So Matua Kagawa insisted that ethical beliefs must become concrete action. He once said, quote, "It is not enough to have ideals. We must translate them into action," end of quote. So basically what he argued is that in the same way that violence at war has a material corrosive effect, peace needs to have material backing. We need to reinforce peace materially. We need to have structural things in place that preserve and uphold peace. One of the arguments that I've been making for a while now is that yes, the Iranian government is problematic, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to justify anything with regards to their government. However, they have demonstrated a willingness to change, particularly when money is involved. So, in other words, if we were to open them up to the international market, trade essentially, you would see reforms happen a hell of a lot faster than people think. And that is the way that you bring about reform for Iran, however frustratingly slow it is and feels. So basically, what Matua Kagua argued is that ideals that are never enacted are like saliva that never leaves the mouth. It's sort of circling, dissolving, nothing, nourishing nothing, essentially. So if leaders speak of human dignity while their actions spill blood, then their words are like teeth without a jaw, unable to bite into reality. Ending the war is not soft thinking. It is the body finally aligning its muscles with its intentions. It is the hand choosing not to strike what the heart claims to value. And so, what Matua Kagua argued is that choosing peace is a positive decision, not positive in the ethical sense, but like I said, it requires a building of institutions and structures and so on and so forth in order to preserve peace. That's number two. Number three, every human life has equal moral weight. So this is something we often hear about, right? And we've sort of more or less heard this point ad nauseum. Whereas Matua Kagua emphasized the intrinsic worth of every individual. And he said this, quote, "Not every sparrow can fall to earth meaninglessly," end of quote. So basically, this was his argument. Each human life is like an organ in a shared body, so to speak, and remove one and the whole system trembles. No kidney, no lung, no fragile capillary can be declared expendable without weakening the entire organism. To call some deaths collateral is to treat blood as if it were disposable, yet once spilled, the body cannot simply will it back into its veins. Ending the war becomes necessary because no political aim can justify draining the lifeblood that sustains us all. And so, again, this isn't necessarily a moral sort of thing Matua Kagua was arguing, although of course he has that moral intuition. But rather, what he means by this is that every innocent life is a contributor. They are part of the economy. An economy, just in its basic definition, is the production and consumption of goods and services. And so, in order for an economy to keep going, the economy is how we all survive, let alone thrive. There needs to be constant production and consumption. So, therefore, materially speaking, the more people, the better. Every life is vital, is important. And so, the fewer there are as a result of war, the weaker we all are. And so, this was Matua Kagua's argument, and I think it has teeth, this argument. If we look at, for example, New Zealand, my own country of origin, they sent 100,000 young men out of a population of 1 million to go serve in World War II. New Zealand is nowhere near as wealthy as many other so-called first world countries, and I have no doubt that sending 100,000 young men to face Armageddon had something to do with this. There is a myth, for example, that the Swiss have, quote, Nazi gold, and that the reason Switzerland is so wealthy is because they took in all of this evil Nazi gold, so to speak. And it's not true. The reality is is that war is expensive and it's not very profitable for the people that are fighting it. It is profitable for the merchant class that advocates for it because they get to sell their weapons, but it's not profitable for you and me. And so, why are the Swiss so wealthy? It's simple. Because while we were all busy killing each other, they were building intergenerational wealth. It's very simple. So, number 4, war reflects a failure of sacrificial love. And this is another one of his stark insights. So, he said this, quote, "Men who fear to make the sacrifice of love will have to fight." End of quote. This is the argument. War is what happens when the jaw refuses to unclench, when the tongue will not speak humility, when the body stiffens instead of bending. Peace demands something harder than force. It asks for the body to absorb tension without striking back. Like a rib cage protecting a vulnerable heart, ending the conflict would require leaders to loosen their grip, to swallow pride like bitter medicine, to accept wounds to ego rather than inflict wounds of flesh. It is the discipline of not letting the fist become the only language the body knows. And so basically, what he means by this is love in the traditional Christian definition, which is to will the good of the other. And evidently, our leaders are not doing that right now. Number 5. So, Matua Kagura didn't just theorize, he acted, even when it put pressure on his own body and position. Matua Kagura, so his inspired sort of, his image, so to speak, or his writings do not ask what is comfortable for the body politique. Instead, his writings ask what keeps society alive, what is it that keeps the body of humanity alive. And so, to oppose war is to stand like a spine under weight, bearing strain so the body does not collapse into violence. Ending the war may feel like stepping into pain, but continuing it is like ignoring a spreading infection. It only burrows deeper, closer to the heart. And so, therefore, in sort of condensed format, this is my Kagura grounded argument against this current war, and the reason why America and Israel need to end the war now. Violence is a toxin in the bloodstream, eroding what it claims to protect. That's number 1. Number 2, ideals without action are like a silent tongue, present but powerless. Number 3, every life is an organ. None can be cut away without harming the other. And number 4, war persists when the body refuses the harder work of restraint and care. It sort of reminds me of John F. Kennedy in his speech, talking about how, those of us that are manly, we do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And it is hard to choose the path of peace, contrary to what people think. It is not an act of weakness, it is an act of strength, particularly on the part of the US. And so, therefore, the US and Israel should end the war, not merely for strategy, but because continuing it is like a body devouring itself, bone grinding against bone, blood spilling faster than it can be renewed, until nothing remains to justify the fight. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.